Surely you remember this majestic scene from The Return of the King when the beacons of Gondor are lit. It is, after all, one of the most glorious from the entire series. And what's so exciting about it are actually the historical parallels, including Viking Age Scandinavia. So let's have a look at that. A recent project conducted at the University of Stavanger has been investigating the fires burning atop Norway's hills and mountain ridges for centuries, once vital for defense and communication. Even though they're mentioned in a wide range of sources, such as place names, medieval laws, and historical maps, they have been largely overlooked until now. We do know that beacons were used in Anglo Saxon Britain as part of the Burh defensive system. Now, you can think of a burh as a refuge, but also as a base for mobile garrisons intended to control movement along rivers, Roman roads, or military roads. The beacon chain linked burhs with smaller local strongholds, often identifiable by weird place names such as Warburton in Staffordshire, facilitating rapid summoning of the Fjord and civilian defences. English foothills in populated regions along major routes were, generally speaking, the places where you could find such beacons, but you could also have sometimes more isolated garrisons in regions such as the Mercian Highlands. The project set out to understand how these beacon systems, as well as the naval defense they supported, known in Old Norse as the Leidanger, were organized in practice. So basically, who maintained the beacons, how much they cost, and what resources were needed to keep such a network functioning across Norway's mountainous regions. The team has mapped dozens of beacon hills and guardhouses, reconstructing systems that date back to the late Viking Age, so around the 10th century. To do this, they combined traditional archaeology with digital analysis. They used geographic information systems to map and study beacons in comparison with ancillary structures. These included mustering sites, boathouses known as naust, so basically the places that held the warships, as well as administrative districts. Dating the beacons proved to be quite a challenge. Around 700 Norwegian place names can be linked to beacon organization, but the problem is that the system remained in use for nearly 9 centuries, so from around 950 to 1814. Distinguishing Viking and medieval sites from later ones required careful linguistic and archaeological detective work. For example, the oldest names contain the Old Norse element viti, and they found about 300 examples of this type. By contrast, later names use the term varde, which means can, and they often refer to post medieval sites. In the late Viking Age and early 11th century, beacon networks were usually local and regional, typically commanded by chieftains. However, by 1274, Magnus Lagabøte, Magnus the Lawmender's Laws of the Land, described a nationally coordinated system that would reflect a gradual incorporation of smaller districts into larger law provinces, a process that is tied to the broader formation of the Norwegian state. More generally speaking, across the entire ancient world, long distance communication relied on sight. So, fires, smoke, flags, other visible signals would carry messages across ridges and valleys, although distance and weather would always be limiting factors. Most beacon systems were built to warn of raids or invasions, but sometimes they could also signal peacetime events such as animal migrations or community gatherings. In Scandinavia, beacons were generally used to signal to chieftains and to mobilize local communities to raise the warships and face the enemy to protect the land. Alongside fire signals, messengers would also carry physical tokens, while horns and other instruments could sound the alarm or direct troops in battle. Together, these systems formed a multi layered network of communication long before written orders or telegraph lines existed. One of the project studies published focused geographically on the Trondheim Fjord, which includes Nidaros, that would be modern day Trondheim, a power center from the Viking Age onward. 33 authentic beacon sites dating back to 1500 or earlier were identified. The intervisibility analysis confirmed that nearly all the beacons had a clear line of sight to at least one other, thus forming a continuous warning chain from the mouth of the Trondheim Fjord to its inland reaches. The pattern that was uncovered fit closely with an older hierarchical model from 1920, so sometimes older historians can be really spot on. So, two first order coastal beacons, roughly 30 kilometers apart, a string of second order fjord beacons, 10 to 20 kilometers apart, and then we have several third order local beacons, those clustered around Nidaros and other central places, likely reflecting the legal obligation for towns to maintain their own beacons. The viewshed analysis extended this by showing which parts of the landscape could be observed from each beacon, and the resulting maps revealed how beacons covered the main fjord routes, settlements, and also elite farms. And this suggested that they were placed strategically to defend and communicate with key population centers rather than just being a coast watch chain. The study notes that while the Western Norwegian system, the one described in the Gulathing law, seemed decentralized with each ship district responsible for its own beacon and ship, the Central Norwegian system of the Frostathing law was likely a little more centralized, coordinated at the county level rather than the district level. Beacons correlate with royal farms, landed men's estates, county churches, and large boathouses, some over 30 meters long, that house the levy warships. The beacon signal would summon the Leithanger crew, so the naval conscription, and officials responsible for regional defense. This integration implies more or less centralized command structure, as also suggested by the case studies, for example, Gullberget in Haugan in the Middle Fjord, visible from the Judicial Assembly site. So, this demonstrates how beacon placement mirrored social hierarchy and power geography as well, because each beacon's line of sight connected to both the defensive choke points, that means fjords and harbors, and also to the centers of authority. Nevertheless, it appears that the Scandinavian systems were only manned in times of crisis. Generally, war was conducted during summer months, so the beacons weren't really used in winter. Unlike the permanent garrisons of later centuries, the Viking and medieval systems relied on local farmers who served under chieftains or royal officers when summoned. Although communication became more sophisticated, the beacon system did remain a central feature of Norway's defense for hundreds of years. So even after the Leithanger naval levy declined in the 14th and 15th century, beacons continued to operate until the end of the Napoleonic Wars. The system, on the other hand, became more integrated into the administrative structures of the emerging state, while the advent of gunpowder weaponry and coastal fortifications transformed its purpose. Old beacon hills gave way to watchtowers. Hundreds of ancient beacon sites and associated boathouses have been identified. Notable examples include Viktelsveten near Stavanger, Vettakollen near Oslo, and Veten on Altoya near Bergen, where layers of charcoal confirm repeated beacon burnings. To date, the fire's radiocarbon analysis on charcoal fragments and lake sediment was used. This was possible because charcoal dust from ancient signal fires settled in lake beds, thus preserving a microscopic record of each blaze. Data modeling then allowed the team to estimate how quickly warnings could spread and how effectively communities could mobilize in response. The results suggest that the system was designed for large scale invasion, the kind of coordinated attack feared during the Viking Age, and this reminds us that the Norse, on a larger scale, were very much preoccupied with self preservation, much more than expansion. The beacon system was thus both a technological achievement and a reflection of social organization because it connected ordinary farmers to local rulers, forming the backbone of a decentralized but responsive defensive network. The population paid for defense in labor and resources, and sometimes quite a lot if you think, for example, about the years of labor invested in making sails. And as royal power consolidated from the late Viking Age onward, kings took increasing control over defense organization. So participation was no longer optional. However, despite dissatisfaction among farmers, the fear of invasion and internal conflict essentially ensured cooperation. Another cool thing about this project was that citizens could actually participate on the database if they had knowledge of such beacons in their regions. And I think you can still do that. I'm not very sure, but I will leave a link in the description. And if you live in Norway, you might as well have a go. Speaking of cool projects, if you want to support this history channel, you can do so by joining as members. You will get access to exclusive content and my eternal gratitude. Or as patrons, I have started posting my content on Patreon ad-free. And I also have a Substack. So if you're interested in written content, you can check out my essays on Substack. Also, if you enjoyed the topic, you might also be interested in Viking Age burial mounds in Norway and beyond, so you should continue with this video I linked. Thank you so much for watching. This was Irina. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.